The past 200 years in the West have seen staggering increases in wealth and economic opportunity. And yet, there have been no comparable increases in our level of happiness. Despite being so much richer than a few generations ago, we're often more anxious about our own importance and achievements than our grandparents were. I call this modern state of restlessness and dissatisfaction anxiety. I want to explain where I think much of it has come from, how it affects our lives, and what I believe we could do about it. If we're surprised that being richer hasn't made us happy and secure, it's because we don't understand the psychology of satisfaction.
When do we feel we have enough? What enables us to feel prosperous and content? Chiefly a comparison with other people. But it's not good enough to compare ourselves to people who are very remote from us in time and place. It's not going to help anyone to feel very rich to be told that they have infinitely more money than one of their medieval ancestors who lived in a mud-walled cottage. We only feel content when we compare ourselves to people who are like us, our friends and colleagues, our neighbours. In short, the sense of being a success is all relative.
No one spends much time resenting the Queen or Bill Gates, but we're liable to get extremely resentful if someone we think is basically just like us moves into a bigger house or gets a slightly better job. We most envy people who we take to be our equals.
The modern world is based around the idea that we're all essentially equal. Not necessarily financially equal, but equal in terms of rights and opportunities. It's a lovely idea, which brings with it one nasty side effect. In a world in which you could believe that those at the top belonged to an inherently superior caste, you didn't need to feel humiliated by anything you didn't have. You might detest those who had more than you, but you didn't need to feel ashamed or anxious. But in a world in which everyone is supposed to be equal, but where there's still a lot of inequality around, it's hard not to take the achievements of others as an implicit reproach for everything you don't have and haven't done.
The best place to go to understand all this is the country where the idea of equality first took hold some 200 years ago, America.
Young, ready, and hungry.
In 1776, America had a revolution which changed the world.
Help us to discover the secrets to our dream.
The new democracy abolished the rigid, class-based hierarchies of Europe.
Just say to yourself every day, it's possible.
From the first, this basic sense of equality energized America, but it also, quite unintentionally, increased Americans' anxieties about what their true place was.
You can't tell me nothing about this subject because I was poor, but I'm blessed God I ain't poor now.
Their anxieties were destined to become our anxieties. The person who first and perhaps best understood the problem of modern equality was a young French aristocrat called Alexis de Tocqueville. In 1831, he came to America in order to study what he called the future shape and temperament of the world.
When de Tocqueville travelled to America, the Europe he was leaving behind was still essentially an aristocratic society, run along feudal lines. This was a world in which you tended to accept the status that you'd been born into. But in America, everything was different. This was a democracy, and here you could change your status according to your luck or your talent. De Tocqueville, writing about his journey, later wrote that what he'd come to see in America was the future, and what he saw when he got there left him both impressed and frightened for all of us.
De Tocqueville distilled the experiences of his 9-month journey into a book called Democracy in America. It's eerie, following in his footsteps 170 years later, to see just how prescient he was. He foresaw the problems that would arise when the old social hierarchies based on class were abolished. There would be no limits to what we could legitimately expect from life.
De Tocqueville was struck at how wealthy ordinary Americans were. They enjoyed a standard of living far superior to that of their counterparts in old Europe. But de Tocqueville noticed something else, perhaps more interesting, that despite their affluence, they constantly wanted ever more and felt great envy at anyone who had something that they didn't.
In a chapter of his book entitled "Why the Americans Are Often So Restless in the Midst of Their Prosperity," de Tocqueville analysed the relationship between equality and a gnawing sense of envy.
So where are we now? What's this house?
This is the Delaware model.
Which is? How does it fit into the range of models?
It is a very popular model. I would say that this model is on the larger end, not our smallest and not our largest.
And does it come with all this furniture?
The young Frenchman was immediately intrigued by the houses Americans built. I was surprised to perceive along the shore a number of little palaces of white marble, several of which were of ancient architecture. When I went the next day to inspect more closely, I found that the walls were of whitewashed brick and the columns of painted wood. In the confusion of all ranks, everyone hopes to appear what he is not.
And this is you said the colonial style?
This is a pretty traditional two-story colonial with...
Is that a Doric column or...?
Those are our decorator columns to enhance the room, where we put a mirror back there, which is also a decorator touch.
Right.
De Tocqueville said, "When inequality is the general rule in society, the greatest inequalities attract no attention. But when everything is more or less level, the slightest variation is noticed. That's the reason for the strange melancholy often haunting the inhabitants of democracies in the midst of abundance, and of that disgust with life, sometimes gripping them even in calm and easy circumstances."
Is this real stone?
That's called a non-standard option.
Joni Hartley works for Washington Homes. Their slogan is, "Making the American Dream Affordable."
Is that a standard piece, do you know?
Yes.
Is that
Oh, no. Above the door, no.
Right.
That is a decorator item.
Right.
In a society of equals, it's natural for people to want what others have. Between 1970 and now, the proportion of Americans who define the things in this store as necessities rose continuously. 3% in 1970 thought a second television essential. Now it's 75%. There have been equivalent increases in the numbers feeling they need the other products here at Best Buy. This relentless process from luxury to decency to psychological necessity had been noticed by de Tocqueville. He thought it explained why the Americans' greater wealth would not necessarily make them happier.
The reason was that all barriers to social expectation had been removed in the United States. In America, wrote de Tocqueville, "I never met a citizen too poor not to be able to glance with hope and envy at the pleasures of the rich."
Move into a better house. Get a better car. Buy better clothes.
Poor citizens, de Tocqueville noticed, compare themselves with rich ones and trust that they too will one day follow in their footsteps.